All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Student Success Stories featured by Max School Prep TV. Today, we have Mr. Isaiah Hamilton. He is a rising senior at Duke University. And also, I need to add that this is our 2023 to 2024 student body president. So, we are in the presence of a really, really great guy right here. He's going to give us some good information, and I'm excited to pick his brain. So thank you, Isaiah, for being here. And I'm going to hand the mic over to you and allow you to just introduce yourself. Where are you from? What are you studying? What are some kind of basic facts about you, kind of interview style? And then 3 adjectives that you feel like capture your essence.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. As kind of already recognized, my name is Isaiah Hamilton, originally from the Northeast, North Carolina area, specifically Elizabeth City. Not a lot of folk know where that is. So I say I'm an outer out from the Outer Banks. I'm a senior here at Duke, double majoring in biology and global health with a minor in chemistry. As kind of mentioned on campus, I am the incoming Duke Student Government President, former president of Black Student Alliance, also involved with Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated on campus. 3 adjectives to describe myself. I would like to say I'm funny. Hopefully that'll come
We'll see.
across.
We'll see.
Yeah, I'll let the audience be the judge of that. Um, 2, I think I can be very innovative. I'm the type of person I really like to enter spaces and leave them better than when found. And I don't think you can do that by doing what people claim to be possible. I think things that are impossible are only such until they're not. And then a third adjective to describe myself, I would probably say sarcastic. I don't take hardly anything serious, sometimes to my own detriment, but yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, that makes me even more excited about this interview. I knew that you were involved in Divine Nine, just because obviously I see you around campus, but just so the audience knows, I'm especially excited to be talking to Isaiah because one of my really good friends was like, "Hey, this guy, you've got to meet him." And just from what you said, I'm like, yeah, this has been a long time coming. So Isaiah, first thing I want to ask you is contextualize your background for our listeners. Kind of, where do you come from? What are some values that you feel like your family has instilled in you to get you to that place where you are today? And maybe even tie that to this kind of innovative, creative mind that you have of I'm going to make an impact and change spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, came from a single parent household. I was raised by my mother, who had my sister when she was 16, had me her in your 30s. If you're following the math there, my sister is in her 30s now. Um, there you go. So yeah, my sister served kind of more as a second mom to me growing up. They were both nurses for a combined 2 decades, and then have since transitioned into dog breeding. So we're a big dog breeding family. If you're a cat person, I'm sorry,
I'm a
no
cat person.
no shade, but I know where my bread's buttered. But yeah, for being in that kind of environment growing up, it was a lot of the work gossip that I think I clung to, right? Like the he said, she said, that really kind of made me buy into this idea of community and the way we kind of function as individuals, right? Like what makes an organization tick, what makes people really connect, or how do we build community? And I kind of took that and ran with it. And a lot of, my academic pursuits or involvements have came from a place of being a first generation income student. There's really not a recipe for you to follow, right? I didn't have a road that was planned for me. So honestly, I'm still winging it to this day. And it's brought me to where I am. So I'm really, grateful to just be able to, you know, follow my instincts is kind of really, what I'll point to. A lot of it, that why I said innovation is because I didn't have a lot to go off of growing up. And when I entered a space, it was pretty much because I was doing it out of my own, want to rather than being told to. So, that came with an inert desire to engage with, you know, the spaces I was taking up because I was actively choosing to enter those spaces. So I've kind of always been very independent, you know, someone who can kind of, you know, survive in any scenario. I like to say I land on my feet often. Um, but yeah, you know, being in a household like that, my mom, you know, had to be a little bit more hands off with me because she was busy working, trying to, like, you know, put a roof over the heads or our heads. So a lot of the time spent was me just kind of doing my own thing. To be honest, I was involved with sports growing up, played football, basketball, and then, you know, student government kind of has been a reoccurring, you know, factor for me. Left the house actually when I was 16 years old, to go to the North Carolina School of Science and Math. So I've kind of had a very unorthodox approach to higher education, especially, you know, being first generation. You know, Duke was a dream school actually for me as well. So have been in the Durham area now going on 6 years. So I feel old as, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but old as all get out. You know, being kind of at this point in time.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I think something that I really want to dig into is who were mentors and role models and people who supported you in your first generation journey? Because the reality is like you said, you know, your mom had to work and like do kind of just was like, it was a very demanding sort of pursuit for her to put a roof over you guys' head. Who was that person for you? Who inspired you, one, to like, I want to go to college, Duke is my dream school, but like who kind of mentored you through that process?
Yeah. So I'll share the story of why Duke. It'll kind of segue into things, but it was actually my third grade year. I remember coming into elementary school and I saw a pamphlet on my desk for Duke Tip. It was an old kind of recruiting, you know, pre-college program that existed. And I saw it on my desk. And at the time it read something along the lines, it was super corny, but it was like something along the lines of like, you're in the top 5% of students in North Carolina. And they really had no like metrics for figuring that out for third graders. It was definitely just like spam mail. Um, but for me at that point in time, it was kind of the first indication or like validation I'd ever received in an academic setting. And you know, it kind of just like lit a fire under me, and it was a sign, you know, for me to maybe go and think maybe academics is something I could pursue, right? Maybe I do belong in an academia, you know, environment. And yeah, it was kind of, the rest is history. It was never anything else. I just kind of only had tunnel vision for Duke. So then it became the process of how can I get from point A, which is being from Camden County, North Carolina, to Duke. Um, and you know, that's kind of all I had my eyes on. So along the way you kind of pick up a lot of things, and like I was mentioning, you know, of course my mom and my sister were supportive, but other than that, you know, I think a lot of people really, I would argue I've kind of just found myself in the right place and right time. You know, in a lot of scenarios I've had people, it was really, I'll point to, middle school was kind of the first mentor role I you know, like I found myself being taught from, or you know, being received. And it was my football coach at the time. He was also my social studies teacher. I'll share the story too. I was actually like about to pass out on the field from a heat stroke. It was like my first time doing like any physical sport. Um, and he was like, "Yeah, there's no way that this kid is gonna come back for day two." But you know, I'm really ignorant, so I came back the next day and kind of did the same thing over and over again, to the point where he was like, "Okay, like I think he pitied me and kept me on the team at the time." But then within the next year, you know, I had, you know, started actually playing JV, you know, by my eighth grade year. So was really able to kind of flip that script. And he basically just believed in me from that point and bought in. Um, and then was able, like I said, to leave the house around 16. And then when I came to Durham for the first time, there was actually a pre high school program, you know, for science and math, and that was a experience that let me go into the Duke Hospital and shadow physicians. And it was a very similar kind of atmosphere there, where I was able to shadow a hematologist and a rheumatologist, and they've both stayed in my life since as kind of, you know, touch points for me. I'm involved in a scholarship where Greenhouse Scholars. they provide a mentor for me as well. So I would say it kind of it takes an army, of people to really, support you. And I would say it's not a one-stop shop. If you're able to kind of find one person that's all being, kudos to you. Like, you've done a much better job than me. But the way I've kind of gone about it is you really have to use different, mentors in your life for different things that you're looking to learn or kind of soak up. But honestly, just being a sponge kind of really promotes that growth, or that inherent mentee type of attitude. Being from a rural area myself, I do think mentorship is the key to bridging a lot of those knowledge gaps that we see, especially in under privileged demographics. um, so yeah, I think a lot of it is when you have an opportunity, seizing it, right? And trying to not, especially at a young age, close doors for yourself. I'm somebody who likes to keep all my options open until I absolutely have to make a decision. So I'm a bit indecisive, but I think it comes from a good place. But yeah.
I like that answer. And I think this world is so much of a who you know kind of world. It's people, it's community that get you from one place to another. And so I'm glad that that was a nugget of advice that you've really stressed, is reaching out and being willing to be a mentee, recognizing and acknowledging you don't have all the answers, you're not the smartest person in the room, and being willing to kind of soak up knowledge from other people. I think that's a really great point. I am interested. So tell me again what your majors are.
Biology and global health.
Okay, so you're on the pre-med track.
Unfortunately.
Oh, wait, why do you say unfortunately? Because I was just about to be like, well, I know it's hard. It's hard, number one, but like, talk to us a little bit about how that passion came to be for you.
Yeah.
And also, like, how have you reckoned how have you reckoned with like being in STEM spaces where, yeah, there are a lot of males, but I don't necessarily know that there are a lot of like men of color in those spaces? Like, what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, trying to think of what's the best way to kind of jump into that. So I'll start with why being like an interest in medicine, kind of coming from just my background I've shared, right? Being raised by two nurses, I
Figured it
was
had something to do with that.
right, yeah, but I was constantly told doctors don't know anything and that they're stupid, and that nurses were the real backbone of the healthcare industry, and they needed a real doctor who would pay attention to the nurses. So that was like kind of my being voluntold, almost to be interested in medicine. But I will also be transparent and say I've seen a career for myself that's not in the hospital for the rest of my life. I'm somebody who knows I get very, bored quickly. So I like it's for me, I'm really passionate, like I said, about community and impact. And for me, a career in the hospital or the operating room, I want to be a neurosurgeon. But a career in that for me is something I see as being short term. I almost see medicine being as a launch board to other things, just because I want to have bigger and broader impact. And I think that's achievable. And I also am somebody who's very passionate that, or a firm believer that dual careers are possible. So, although I am really invested in medicine, I see myself exploring a multitude of avenues, and career paths still simultaneously. But how that transitions to Duke and kind of being, in the minority, in a lot of spaces, or at least STEM spaces, you kind of just can't let that be a deterrent for you, right? Like, I think it's very easier to succumb to like imposter syndrome and say, well, I don't belong here, or this isn't right for me. But that's simply not true. If you are invited to a space, right, like you're accepted, we were both accepted into Duke, that was for a reason. And there's intentionality that goes into like handcrafting a class, like an incoming class of students. So you're a part of that cohort for a reason. And again, for me, it was a little bit more straightforward because it was a dream school. But after coming here, it was also the COVID year, fall 2020, and everyone was social distance. We were in single rooms, so it is very easy to see yourself on an island. And I'll actually admit I was very like underwhelmed with the university at that time because I'd built it up in my head to be like Hogwarts, like this crazy school. And then you get there and it's, like social distance, everybody's like double masked up and there's not a lot going on at the time. But it's the people that I think really, excuse me, that really, drive home what makes Duke Duke. And for me being in those STEM spaces, that's like what the constant reminder is like who I do this for and why I do it is really like my people, the people I keep in my circle. And yeah, they're constant motivators, for me, my friends and family. So I think that is kind of what, validates your existence in a space, or gives you that permission, so to speak, to do things. And also simply because, for so many generations people lacked these opportunities that we have, or access to certain spaces. So it's almost, in my opinion, disrespectful to not take the most, of an, or take the, the most advantage of an opportunity, that you're presented with, especially to better yourself. And being, again, a person of color, is there's never, the thing that, I say a lot to different, friends, is that there's no limit on success, right? So like there's no cap. The world doesn't say there has to be 1,000 millionaires, right? Like, and there's no cap to who can be successful. So for us, it's the game, or like us as, people of color, it's always a game of like continue to create, innovate, just take up space and do what you enjoy doing, and it'll lead to, happiness.
I agree. Something that I want to return to is this idea of imposter syndrome. This comes up a lot in the interviews that I've been doing. And I guess I want to take you back to that point before you stepped foot on Duke's campus and you're applying and you're doing all of this stuff. Were there any external sort of, or maybe even internal hurdles, biases, stigma that you faced, like from people or from yourself, saying like, you're first gen, like, do you really think you can do this? Like, Duke is like a really, amazingly hard school. Like, you sure you're cut out for this? So kind of that pre getting there moment, because I know that fear is real for
Yeah.
first gen people, especially. So I want to talk about how you've overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth. You said it best, right? There's a bunch of people for the majority of my life who are like, you're not gonna get a Duke, or you're, because I wore that on my sleeve, right? Like I made it very well known that's what I wanted to do from a young age, and people knew that. And it was this constant thing of, no, like you're not gonna do it. Like, because no one had, right? Like being from, again, Camden County, North Carolina, I could count on the number of my hands how many people, like went to Duke. I think I'm within single digits. So yeah, it was not, the odds were not in my favor, so to speak. And I would say it didn't even feel possible until I left the house and went to the School of Science and Math, because
Is that a boarding school, by the way?
yeah, it's a public residential school. So I spent both junior and senior year living in dorms. So kind of got my,
College experience
college
pre-COVID.
experience. Yeah, exactly. Pre-COVID a little bit. So but yeah, like, being there, you're surrounded by, they would always say the state's best and brightest, because they recruit from the entire, state of North Carolina. So it's all these people who were big fish in a little pond. Then you become a little fish in a big pond. And then it was immediately the same thing all over again of like, I'm sitting across from somebody who is like Ivy bound, guaranteed. Like there's no way, they're not going to do great things. And you really like, and that's a moment where you're surrounded by so much greatness, I would argue, that like, you kind of just become like, amalgamated into your environment. And yeah, like you got to surround yourself by people who want similar things as you. And that was a place that was very conducive for me at that time. And that's kind of where the switch flipped for me, and I was beginning to think, yeah, like this actually is possible. It did not feel real, and part of it is also this just like vagueness, right? Like you build it up again in your head to be a certain thing, and it doesn't feel real because you're not there, right? Like I'm not there yet. And what's that process of getting from point A to point B? But science and math is actually not even 2-3 blocks away from Duke East campus. So like I was close, like it's like I could taste it on the tip of my tongue almost because I was right there. Like I'm taking up the same city, right? Like it brought me physically and mentally one step closer to my goal. Um, and it was, it was the same thing, right? Like you feel imposter syndrome. Like I'm not saying I was, like the best there was at the school, but I was definitely committed to myself, and my community, and the people again that I was surrounded by, really, uplifted me and saw, what's possible for everybody on, like I said, because there's no limit for success. So, I took that time to really just like hone in on myself, and work really hard, and I'll share a funny story too, because I was lazy, so I didn't really want to apply to too many schools. So I actually just had applied to like Duke, and it was nearing the application deadlines. So if you're listening to this, do not do what I'm about to tell you. But like I chose to like not apply to like any schools. I only really applied to like UNC and then Duke, because I was like putting all my eggs in one basket.
It worked
And
out for you though, brother. It
it
worked
worked
out.
out, but like, I don't recommend that strategy for anybody else.
I One thing I really feel like resonates about what you said is you become and you are who you hang out with. And it's clear, everybody, from Isaiah's story, that what really kind of switched that gear for him is when he was surrounded by other high achieving people that like you knew were going to do big things. And you're like, hey, they can do it. I can do it too. Right. And so I hope that that's something that people really glean from what you're saying, is that surrounding yourself, I guess, like I like to say, soaring with eagles instead of flying with sparrows, that sort of
Right.
mentality, people should have that stick with them for the rest of their life. Like if you're just around people that are bums, and just like, yeah, I don't want anything for my life, that's going to be the mentality that you have, right? And so that's number one. And then number two, and I feel like Isaiah, you'll probably be able to second this, is like being at Duke, we're again like big fish in a huge pond, right? Like we are not the big boys on campus. And it's like there are so many other people who are doing great things. But to have that mindset shift of, I'm not going to be intimidated by somebody that may be smarter than me. I'm not going to be intimidated by somebody that's doing more than me. I'm going to use that to be a sponge. I'm going to use that to be inspired to do my own thing. I'm going to utilize that to not put a cap on my own greatness. Like that's the key. That's what I'm gleaning from what you're saying. Like I'm feeling fired up. Feeling fired up.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. So with our limited time that we have left, what I want to touch on is your leadership on Duke's campus. I think like one, it feels like overwhelming to think about, like, dang, this is a really big school, and like how do I become the president, like student body president of the university, or like, did you say BSA president too for a school year? Like, what was the drive to get into those leadership positions? What kind of challenges, internal, external, did you place that maybe made you question, like, can I do this? And what is that advice that you have? This is a three-parter, so like I'm assuming you're going to touch on all of this. What is the advice that you have for people who are like, I want to do that too, Isaiah, but like I'm afraid, like, do I really have it in me?
Uh, yeah, no, I mean, those are all good questions. And so, to kind of start about the journey of it all, freshman year for me, like I said, was the COVID year, right? Like a whole lot of nothing going on. I have nothing that I will probably claim to fame, from freshman year. My involvement at that time was, I had actually lost my election, for student government. So I was not involved in student government until my spring. I was ignorant and like, persistent. So I wanted to, put my hat back and my name back out there. So I had joined kind of unofficially. I was a non-voting member. So I kind of just like sat in but didn't reap any of the benefits. And then for BSA, Black Student Alliance, I was a programming, member or committee member, but it was hard because there was no programming because it was COVID. So like a whole lot of nothing, like I said. But a good friend of mine at the time who was the outgoing BSA president my freshman year had told me, hey, like you should apply for the exec board. I'm like, nah, like that's not for me, right? Like I had actually told myself, because it was such a 180 from me, right? I had gone from a period where I think it was like the high point in my life, right? Like science math was the best 2 years I had experienced, at up until this point, to immediately going into a pandemic and like everything being the exact opposite, Duke being extremely underwhelming to me. So I did not feel capable of really anything at that point, right? I was like stuck in my room. I didn't feel like I could even learn content. I was struggling in chemistry at the time. Like it was just a lot of struggle, to be honest. So I didn't feel like it was achievable. And the same type of leadership I had in high school, where I served back then as Senate president, and I was, kind of the equivalent to BSA president back at high school. So I just didn't feel those things to be tangible anymore for me. But I kind of got voluntold again by a friend.
Story of your life, Isaiah. Getting
Yeah,
voluntold.
yeah, right. So yeah, he was like, you're gonna apply basically. I was okay. So I applied and I was chief of staff because I was too afraid to like do anything that was external facing. So I didn't know, and I felt like I didn't know enough people. So I was like, okay, what's the most like internal position I can pick? It was the chief of staff role. So that's what I served as in sophomore year. And then that spring, I ran kind of two elections dually for Black Student Alliance president, and then I was president pro tempore, which is like a fancy way of saying I just like led Senate for student government my junior year, and then of course campaigned this past spring for student government presidency. But every step along the way I've mentioned was filled with doubt. Like I will be transparent. Because you look around and again you see so many people who are capable of things, and I'm a visual learner, so what I like, out of sight out of mind, and it's hard to kind of like meant like physically and metaphorically like look yourself in the mirror and like size yourself up, right, and say like what am I capable of versus what I'm not capable of, and you have to kind of set realistic goals. But the thing is like you got to ask yourself like, well, how do you eat an elephant, right? Like, well, one bite at a time. So you got to slowly start like chipping away at the things that are your no's. Like, why can't you do something? And if you kind of keep just asking yourself why to every single response you can give yourself, you'll kind of get to the truth of the core of it, right? And this is not me saying like it's right for everybody, right? Because like not there's not like there's you have to know what makes you tick. And for me, I soak up a lot of energy from people, so I can get very easily motivated by people if I'm around like high energy people. But if I'm around a lot of people who are just like moving slow, right, like have a tendency to be introverted, I can go right back into my shell. So like for me, being in these leadership positions again, like coming into BSA presidency last year, oh my God, like I was so anxious. Because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. It was not the same level of responsibility that I had in high school when I'm dealing with like 100 people, right? Max that were in the
A
Black
lot. It's a
community.
lot of people you're dealing with now.
Yeah, like you multiply that by five, and that's not even to mention I had dual roles in BSA and student government, and I was involved in my fraternity. So I had three leadership positions and was sitting on three exec boards at the same time, on top of my pre-med routine, and I was doing undergraduate research. So like something had to give, right? Like that was like really what it was for me. And it was, again, it was a lot of it is just being persistent. And like if you can, sometimes what I've learned throughout all this is when you enter a space, don't sell yourself short. And like wear, like I always joke and say I wear a lot of hats on campus, or at least last year I've kind of condensed them now, but like before I would say I wear a lot of hats. And it became so much so to the point where like I entered a space, I didn't introduce myself as like X, Y, or Z. Well, the truth is I'm X, Y, and Z. Like it's you're all those things. So for me, when I would it was kind of this mental shift where I really felt in when I first got into these leadership roles that it was almost kind of burnt out, right? It was like I'm doing a lot for my community and I'm not feeling it poured back into me. And then it became this kind of mental switch of you have to tell yourself, right, like you're doing these things because like you care, and you're doing these things for the people that care about you, right? And like when that kind of mental shift of just like, oh, I'm doing this grunt work, like it shifts into I'm doing things that is going to make a difference for somebody at some point in time, there's stake there, right? And like that's what matters when you're trying to like create change in a place or in a system. And if my whole goal was if I can make somebody's experience at Duke University years after me or next year, whenever, a semester after me, better than when I first came into Duke and I thought this was not how the school of my dreams was supposed to be, then it's a mission accomplished. And I'm not saying you have to do the absolute most like I did. Like it was, it's very taxing, but I don't have any regrets because, I again, it's the community that really made it worthwhile for me. And although it's very easy to look around and say, and be hard on yourself and say like, oh, this person does this better than me, or this person is, doing that, and I'm not. Well, you're sharing space with those people, so it's like there's got to be a commonality. And when you start to find that common denominator and look, to build bridges between people rather than barriers, it really opens a lot of doors for you, right? And I will add a caveat to this and say, do not approach, anything I'm saying from like a transactional lens, right? Like this is not this, don't be that person who like networks just to like one up
Just to
somebody.
check a box.
Yeah, just to check a box, or like resume stack pad. Like that's not it. You have to actually care about what you're doing, or you're not gonna ever be satisfied. So if you're questioning, am I capable of X, Y, and Z? First, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to do it in the first place? And if your head's in the right space and you like genuinely care, it's gonna motivate you to do a much better job. And I promise, the 100% you thought you could have gave is gonna then become like 120%. And you're going to start surpassing yourself. Like had I asked, freshman Isaiah, if any of the things I've done in the past couple of years was possible, I would have told you no immediately, just because I like sold myself short for so long. And it wasn't until I was voluntold to like enter a space and I said, oh, this isn't so bad. Like I like dipped my foot in the water. It's like, oh, this is not so bad, that I was beginning to slowly like warm up to the idea of like, oh, I can do this, right? And it's like a lot of it's hard because you don't know what you don't know. So until you're willing to kind of just like embrace that unknown and face a challenge head on, or like push yourself, like learn a new skill, just if you think you may not be the best fit for something but you're really interested in it, still pursue it, because all those things are growth opportunities. And when you start looking at, your experiences as such, you're going to constantly be like improving.
I think that's all like really meaningful. And I think I'm going to summarize a few of the points that I just took out of that. Is one, like making meaning of your work. Like that's the only way you're going to be successful. That's the only way you're going to make the fullest impact that you can make. And that's the only way you're really going to have the drive to do the work you're doing, is if you find and recognize meaning in that. And I think that that's really important, that people don't take on positions just because, but because they are really dedicated to it and know what's the meaning behind it. So I think that's one thing. Number two, I feel like we are kind of coming back to this theme of, it is so important who you surround yourself with, because I think about like you being voluntold, but like those are it was because you were with people who saw your gifts, who were also like doing great things, and they were like, Isaiah, I know you can do this too, right? And like, had you not had those people in your community, who knows what you would be doing right now, right? And so I think that that's really important, that people are like surrounding themselves with those who are a mirror to them, right? Who spotlight your gifts right back at you and show you like, dang, you're capable. And I think there's an element of self-awareness in this. Like, not everybody is like you, Isaiah, where they're gifted enough to take on like all of these different things, to wear all of these different hats. And that's something you've got to recognize. Like, what is your capacity? Like how much can you handle and still do your best work, but also not burn out? That's different for everybody. And recognizing not everybody is cut out to be the president of a university, and that's okay. But like, you may have some other skill set that you bring to the table that is like your niche and that is good for you. And so you don't have to copy what anybody else is doing, but having that awareness to know what your gifts and what your strengths, but also like having enough self-awareness to know like, okay, what can I not do, at least right now? And then the last thing, like, this is me like lovingly telling you this. I've heard a couple of times that you've used the word like, yeah, I'm ignorant, so I just like kept like throwing my hat back in the ring. I don't want to ever hear you say that again, because I think like the reality is like, you have been like a theme of your story is the persistence element. Like even going back to football where you were like, dang, I'm sucking wind out here about to like almost pass out, and you weren't a quitter and you still went back. And like, just like you said, you lost that election your freshman year. You could have quit then and could have been like, dang, like I'm not cut out for this. But the mark of true success is not allowing failure to be that hindrance and to say, you know what, I'm going to get back up and do it again. So that's not ignorant. That's calculated risk taking and persistence. I think like that's how I need you to start describing that, my friend, because that's admirable about you. So I want to ask you one last question. I want you to make this like as condensed as you can, because I got to run to do something, but I'm like, I don't want to stop talking to him. What is one like piece of advice that you want to just like leave our listeners with? One kind of just like take home message that you're like, if you've gotten anything from this, it should be this.
Yeah. Well, I have two things to kind of share, and it's going off of what you said, and I think it puts it all in a nice bow. The
Nice.
first being, like I said, you do have to be self-aware and like know your limits. And like I've voiced before, I've even experienced burnout, right? And like I had to kind of like pivot and readjust. So what I'll say is really it's not about who can do the most or do the best in the most things. It's about honing your craft, and whatever that looks like is whatever that looks like, period, right? So become a subject matter expert, right? Like that's what you want to become. You want to be in your lane, stay in that lane if you really enjoy it, and become the best you can possibly be in that area. That might be multiple areas, but know that for yourself, and don't let other people deter you from it, right? Like they're only going to kind of try to bring you down, and what's the point of that if we only live once? The second thing I will share is I've spoke a lot about mentors, right? And I think that's been a theme of this conversation. But what I will always encourage you to do is reflect on your experiences and echo that back down, because the same way that, like I am grateful for all the mentors I've had in my life, there's going to be people that come behind you,
You're
and you've
doing
got
that
to
right now.
flip
You
that
are
script.
doing that
And
right now.
you have to be able to take that mentee hat off, put your mentor hat on, and it becomes a little bit vague, right? Like I have recognized it a little bit more in the moment, what becomes teaching opportunities or like self-governance opportunities, but allow other people to grow too, right? And it's not all about your narrative, it's about our narrative as a collective. So I think that's what I'll leave on.
I think that is great. I have nothing to add to that. I want to thank you for your time, Isaiah. This has surpassed my expectations for what this call was going to look like. And so I'm just grateful for your time, your wisdom, your stories. And I hope that people find this as helpful and as moving as I have. So thank you again.
Of course, if I can be any more of help or a resource, let me know.
Okay, absolutely. All right, bye.